Joined now by Alec Lasley from thehoosier.com as tonight the Indiana Hoosiers take on the Nebraska Cornhuskers, in which normally we would have said, all right, this should be a nice little tune-up game, Alec. But then they went and knocked off the number 7 Creighton Blue Jays on the road at a place they hadn't won since 1995.
Yeah, and I mean, this Nebraska team coming off a couple good wins. Obviously, Florida State, not the team that they have been, but handled them pretty easily a couple games ago. Handled Boston College pretty easily in the ACC Big Ten Challenge. So 3 in a row, obviously capped off by that Creighton win, which I think a lot of people were shocked and surprised by, especially the way that Nebraska defended them. Look, Nebraska plays a much different style, but very similarly to what Rutgers plays. They like to grind it out. They play a very slow tempo type of game. They like to kind of get in your face and be the tougher team. It's not typically a pretty style of basketball. And this is a game that Indiana's at least scheme-wise and style-wise has kind of struggled with in the past. And obviously we saw how they struggled against Rutgers in the kind of toughness category. So it's a game that obviously can't be taken lightly, but a game that Indiana needs to come out and obviously put on a good performance in and not look too far ahead, obviously with the big one coming up on Saturday.
And, you know, one of the things, Alec, that I look back to, and I sound like a broken record because I mentioned this 84 times already, but it's the statistics that I can't just get over. I mean, Nebraska won that game, 3 3-pointers, shot 7 free throws. So to me, this is a game where, all right, Indiana took a punch in the mouth against Rutgers. Now you're going to have to come up and, as you mentioned, they're going to have to play a team that maybe not the most skilled, but they're going to be physical. They're going to try to set the tone in this game. And if they're the more physical team, Indiana's going to have its hands full. So I'm interested to see how this IU team responds after a loss against a team that they're going to have to – it's going to be a physical matchup, like you said, just like last weekend. So how do they respond after kind of failing that test last week against Rutgers?
Yeah, and one thing with Nebraska, they play that aggressive physical style of basketball without fouling. They're one of the least whistle teams in the country. They're only giving up about 9 free throws a game. Creighton only got 5. So, and Creighton's a very physical team as well. And you know, so when you look at Indiana, a team that typically gets to the foul line a decent amount, especially a guy like Trace Jackson Davis, who kind of likes to muscle his way through there in the paint. You know, this is a game where it's probably not going to have a lot of whistles. And that's tending to kind of side on a team like Nebraska, because Indiana, you know, they like to kind of ream the refs a little bit here and there, especially some of the backcourt players. Xavier Johnson, if it doesn't go his way, right, he likes to complain a bit, and we saw that entire team complain a lot against Rutgers when fouls did not go their way or fouls were supposed to go their way and didn't. So, you know, this is more so, yes, they need to come out and be physically ready, but I think more so mentally they need to be prepared for a physical, grinded out kind of game. And it's a game, again, that they have won in the past, but it's, you know, the recent memory of Rutgers is obviously laying large here.
Yeah, the Nebraska Cornhuskers coming in, they've always played Indiana kind of tough. They're catching Indiana at a bad time for them, I would hope. Coming off of this loss to Rutgers, and even with that win at Creighton, giving them a lot of confidence. This is going to be I want to see how Indiana responds. Like I said earlier, they don't have to win this game by 20, but they need to win this game. To me, the spread is like 13 points, which is a little surprising that it's that big. I would have thought more like 10, 11. If they win by 11, 12, I'm like, okay, that's a win. But if it's a tight win, I think you got to have a little bit of concern for the
I mean, yes and no, right? I mean, conference games are tough to come by, you know, regardless of who you're playing. So, you know, as long as they get a win, I think that's the most important part. You know, right, bounce back. It's probably not going to be, like I said, a super pretty type of basketball, especially if Jalen Hood-Schifino is going to be out, which it sounds like he probably won't play. Obviously, still some time before game time, and Mike Woodson didn't come out and obviously say that right off the bat, but just doesn't sound like he's going to be out on the floor tonight. So you're going to see a lot of that same offense that Indiana ran last year, that Indiana ran against Rutgers, which was not very pretty. Nebraska, again, likes to get up and guard, and it's going to come down to just keeping their cool, especially in that backcourt. Xavier Johnson needs to have a much better game than what he had against Rutgers if Indiana wants to come out and not just win this game, but be comfortable in this game from start to finish. But I think Nebraska's defense is definitely going to put a hurt on Indiana, at least to start. I'd like to see what Indiana does if Trayce Jackson-Davis is doubled, because that's been a big storyline following the Rutgers game, of just kind of the lack of movement that Indiana had around him. And it looked very similar to that offense of last year where, at times they just continue to look for Trayce Jackson-Davis and just ball watch. And that's something that obviously can't happen when this offense is clicking on all cylinders. That's when there's a lot of movement. There's a lot of high ball screens, right? The guards are getting downhill and kicking out to Miller Kopp or whoever that may be in the corner. So, I think this game is going to be a little bit closer than what people think. But I still think Indiana, has the attitude that they need coming into this one. Whereas maybe if they did beat Rutgers, that they would have a little bit of a lull before Saturday.
So one of the things that I think we noticed in that Rutgers game, without Jalen Hood-Schifino on the floor, was probably the first time this season, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that we saw Xavier Johnson kind of press, where he maybe felt like he needed to do more because he didn't have his running mate in the backcourt for this game. I mean, is there some sort of – Mike Woodson has talked about, like, we don't need him to do what he did basically last year towards the end of the season. He doesn't have to be that guy. I feel like part of this game comes down to him. I don't want to call it selfishness, but him realizing that there are still 4 other guys on the floor. And even though maybe he doesn't spend as much time on the floor with Trey Galloway or whoever's going to get the start tonight, he can feel comfortable in trusting his teammates. I just didn't feel like he was quite as trustworthy in the backcourt and throughout that game as he has been through the previous 7 games.
Yeah, and he hasn't. And Mike Woodson talked about it post-game as well, and talked about it a little bit yesterday when we got to talk to him, just him pressing way too much, right? I mean, he was trying to do everything for that team when he didn't need to, right? And I mean, that's probably the first time this season that we've seen that out of him. But again, that's the first time that Jalen Hood-Schifino's not been in the lineup, right? And you had other guys that weren't really playing, up to their full potential. Trey Galloway had just come back. You don't typically see a lot of Trey Galloway as that secondary ball handler with Xavier Johnson. So that's a little bit of getting used to. As much as Trey Galloway can drive, get into the paint, and still facilitate, right? There's definitely a drop off in overall offensive ability when Jalen Hood-Schifino's not on the floor compared to someone like Trey Galloway. And again, that's not to take anything away from Trey Galloway, because he does a fantastic job for this team. Right. And he was pretty much the only one who was able to get into the middle of that Rutgers defense and at least create some open looks for other guys on the floor. But I mean, that was the first game that he really, really pressed. You could tell kind of from start to finish. I think, again, the road environment played a little bit into that as well with him. So being back at home is going to be kind of more of a calming, influence, especially with that crowd. But he needs to play better. He knows he needs to play better. Mike Woodson talked about how Xavier Johnson and him watched film multiple times of that Rutgers game since the game ended. So, I think that's, just a little blip on the radar there of something that you're probably going to see maybe 1 or 2 more times this year. But for the most part, Xavier Johnson, I think, is going to be much better tonight and obviously moving forward, and they need him to be.
Alec, a couple matchups that I think are going to be key. Obviously, Nebraska, as you put out in the piece, led by 6'8" forward Derek Walker. Also at guard, it's Sam Grizzell, 6'2" guard, who has the ball in his hands the most. For Walker, I'm assuming Race Thompson will draw that assignment since he's an inside-out guy. I don't know that.
It'll probably be more Trace, because a guy like Juwan Gary, who's that other kind of front court player, much more of an athletic, much more of like a Jordan Geronimo-esque athletic guy who likes to kind of hang out on the perimeter. a little bit more than Derek Walker in terms of ability to score from the outside. Derek Walker is going to use his strength, use his kind of aggressive nature to even if he is on the perimeter, get downhill. And I think you'd much rather have a guy like Trayce Jackson-Davis on him, where even if Derek Walker beats him a little bit, you still have that shot blocking ability and recovery from Trayce Jackson-Davis, as opposed to Race Thompson, who's probably not obviously to that extent of a shot blocker. And utilize Race Thompson a little bit more on a guy like Juwan Gary. But I mean, the front court matchup, I think is going to be difficult for Indiana, not in terms of star power, but they have the athletic ability and the quickness to get this front court in foul trouble. I think this is a game where Jordan Geronimo could come into and kind of see his role increase a little bit and see his minutes increase with that athletic ability and with that versatility defensively, at least. And Malik Reneau is going to have to step up. He's had a couple off games playing against higher level competition here against North Carolina, got in foul trouble a lot. And then obviously against Rutgers was in foul trouble at times as well too. So he's going to need to play better. That entire front court is going to need to be ready. And Race Thompson needs to step up as well. He's had a pretty poor start to the season so far. So if this front court's not ready to play, the Nebraska front court is not something to kind of push to the side here.
I don't want to backcourt one quickly, Dustin. Sam Grizel, like I said, Xavier, I'm assuming will draw that assignment since he's got the most of the ball handling assignments. Xavier's going to have to stay out of foul trouble as well, because that is something that could be most problematic for Indiana right there. They cannot have Xavier get into foul trouble tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. And it'll be interesting. I think assuming Trey Galloway gets the start, if Jalen Hood-Schifino's not out there, which he did against Rutgers, I think he may draw that start because you don't want to pick up that quick early foul on Xavier Johnson and lose that aggressiveness that he has on both ends of the floor. So I would probably play him a little bit more off of the ball there. But I think Trey Galloway will probably get a lot of those minutes. It's going to be a team effort, especially defensively. But I think Trey Galloway, especially the job that he did against Caleb Love, some of the Carolina guards as well. And then when he was on the floor guarding the main ball handlers for Rutgers, what he did there too. So I think kind of give that responsibility to Trey Galloway and hope that Xavier Johnson doesn't pick up a quick one early, trying to reach in or especially offensively being a little bit out of control.
Basketball can be a complex game, so let me know if I'm oversimplifying this. My sense for this one is, Alec, I feel like if Indiana can knock down some of the perimeter shots and really stretch Nebraska's defense, unlike they were able to do against Rutgers, I feel like Indiana might be able to run away with it. If they're maybe even not behind the three-point line, if they're just able to hit some jump shots and force Nebraska to defend the entire half court, basically, I think that really opens things up for this Indiana offense, especially on the interior, and maybe makes life a little bit easier for Trayce Jackson-Davis. If they don't, that's where they get into this rock fight. And then all of a sudden, if you're depending on Trayce and he's getting double teamed and they can't hit a jump shot, that's where I feel like this team could get in trouble. So again, maybe I'm oversimplifying things. I just feel like hitting jump shots in this game, especially early, kind of setting that tone and stretching that Nebraska defense, to me is going to be a huge factor. Like I think it could be, you're going to know the tempo of this game maybe within the first two television timeouts, like the first 8 minutes of this game.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Obviously, making shots helps everything offensively. Mike Woodson talked about that, saying, it's not scientific. It's just, making the shots that you need to. And Indiana did get some open looks against Rutgers. They just weren't able to finish there. But Nebraska, allows opponents to take 24 threes a game, allows opponents to make 8 threes a game. So it's not like they limit the opportunities from the perimeter. So if Indiana is getting those chances, which I think they're still going to get, it's probably going to come down to who outside of Miller Kopp is going to be able to make. Obviously, Miller Kopp's shown this year that he is that knockdown shooter that they need. He's been obviously very consistent in that category from game one to last week, and I think last week showed that he's ready even to take that next step as a scorer for this team. But yeah, I mean, if they're not able to make those outside shots, they're probably going to end up looking into Trace Jackson Davis and those big guys a little bit more. And that's when that defense collapses. And that's when it comes back to the potential double teams and what this offense is going to do on the perimeter to make it easier for a guy like Trace Jackson Davis to either kick it out or to at least spread out that defense just a little bit more.
What are you wanting to see from this team after that loss on the road at Rutgers before they head out to Las Vegas?
Yeah, again, the biggest thing is if they get punched in the mouth early or at any point in this game, to be able to show that toughness that they do have. Miller Kopp talked about it yesterday. They wouldn't be in this situation if they didn't have toughness. It just Rutgers out-toughed them last weekend, but I think they just an overall collective group. I think that was a good kind of punch in the mouth that they needed to realize that, hey, Big Ten season's here. Maybe we're not as tough as we really thought we were. So I want to see that. And, again, it gets down to what we talked about earlier. I want to see Xavier Johnson play within himself, which he has the ability to do. And they're so much better when he does that. And we'll see what happens with the bench, right? I mean, the bench was non-existent against Rutgers. You take Jalen Hitchafino off the floor, you move Trey Galloway, who's typically that spark off of the bench, into the starting lineup, and it lost a little bit of that firepower in the second unit. So if that's the same rotation, guys like Tamar Bates definitely going to have to step up and maybe not see the scoring performance that we saw against Jackson State, but see a little bit more consistency with him. And that's been the biggest thing with Tamar Bates ever since he got on campus was just that inconsistent offensive performance from game to game, or even from possession to possession. So I think that's big, and just finding a little bit more consistency out of him.